Order, order. Marie Goldman to move the motion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I formally move the motion. So I'd like to thank everybody for coming along to this Westminster Hall debate today. I can see that the benches are very, very full on the government side and on the some of the opposition benches are reasonably full. But I'd very much like to thank members for coming along to this really, really important debate on a subject that I know is filling up all of our inboxes. Now I'm going to try and keep my speech as short as possible because I know there are so many people that do want to speak, but there are various points that I do just want to make. Government support for education, health and care plans, or EHCPs. What do we mean by EHCPs? For the benefit of anybody watching this back who may not understand the system, EHCPs are a fundamental part of the special educational needs system. They are the thing that are responsible for providing the additional support that children need in schools to help support them through their educational life and beyond as well. But there's a big problem with them. And that's that they are either not, children and parents are not getting the support that they need through the EHCP system. And even when they are getting EHCPs, when they are granted EHCPs, those EHCPs themselves are sometimes not being delivered. So even when the support is set out in them, then the schools are unable to deliver them. And parents are ending up in this ridiculous situation where in many cases they're having to take their local authorities to court. And then the local authorities are losing 99% of cases, but it's delaying and delaying and delaying and costing parents a huge amount of money and costing local authorities a huge amount of money. So what do I mean? Well, on the 3rd of September last year, the government published local authority level figures for the actual waiting times for a decision following an education, health and care needs assessment. So that's the first stage. So a parent applies for what's an EHCNA, a needs assessment, and then the local authority has 6 weeks to decide whether they're going to do that, and then 20 weeks in total to issue the EHCP. So how long are people actually waiting? Well, there are huge discrepancies across the system. So Hampshire, for example, Hampshire County Council is issuing its EHCPs within 20 weeks, 75% of the time. So that doesn't sound too bad, right? Essex County Council, where I'm situated, they are issuing their EHCPs 0.9% of the time within 20 weeks. And both of those councils have over 3,000 requests.
Imran Hussain.
Thank you very much. Can I thank the Honourable Lady for bringing such an important debate to this chamber. And she's right to mention the timescale, and she will know in 2023 only half of EHC plans were issued within the statutory 20 weeks. She will also know that whether or not children receive support depends too much on their postcode and how well the parents can navigate what can only be described as a chaotic system. So does she agree with me that the said system is failing families? We can't have a sticky plaster solution, and what we need is a root and branch review.
Marie Goldman.
I thank the Honourable Member for that intervention, and I wholeheartedly agree with them that it is a completely broken system, and that means complete reform. But I would just gently say to the Minister and to anybody listening to this debate, the longer that reform takes, the more harmful it will be for children. Yeah. There are children right now who are suffering because they're not getting the support they need. And children keep getting older. They don't wait for governments to decide what they're going to do. They don't wait for root and branch reform. They need the support right now, and parents need the support right now. So while I absolutely welcome a whole-scale review of this and whole-scale change, there are things that we could do to alleviate the problems now, and I really would urge the government, if the Minister takes nothing else away from this debate, I hope that she will take away the plea that we do more things now, that we speed up some of that reform, some of that implementation now, because there are things which I'll come on to in a bit about what we could do. I will give way.
Thank my honourable friend for giving way and indeed for securing such a vital and important debate. She talks about inequality. SEND funding is unequal across the country. Somerset Council, for example, is part of the F40 group, which is part of a number of poorest funded councils across the country. It receives less than £8,000 gross dedicated grant funding per mainstream pupil in 24-25, more than 5,000 less less than the best funded local authorities. So does my honourable friend agree with me that we must tackle this postcode lottery to urgently provide better support for some of our nation's most vulnerable pupils?
Of course, and my honourable friend raises a really, really important point, because of course we must tackle this inequality. And I know that the government will turn around and say, well, we've put £1 billion extra funding into special educational needs, and that's great, that's very welcome, and it's much better than no extra money into special educational needs. But unfortunately, it won't touch the sides. Local authorities are saying that they have a deficit in the high needs block of £3 billion, and that's estimated, some estimates say that's going to go up to £8 billion in the near future. So we really are looking at a massive funding shortfall on this. Yes, sir.
I thank and congratulate the Honourable Lady for having secured today's important debate, because in Slough, attainment outcomes for special educational needs and disabilities children were below the national average, and that is precisely why we need more funding and resources for Slough children. As a parent, I can only imagine the anguish of those parents who have to navigate the complex and time-consuming process of gaining an EHCP, particularly as only half of EHCPs are issued within the statutory 20-week limit, and only 98% of appeals are successful. Does my honourable friend agree that in order to have improvements in EHCPs, we need to regain, first of all, the trust and confidence of parents?
Absolutely. I thank the member, the honourable member, for his intervention, because the trust of parents is really, really important in the system, and important to be able to take this forward. So we need to show that we are listening to parents, but we also need to show that we're giving parents the information they need to alleviate their stress, for example. So when you have a child with special educational needs, you know that they need extra support. It's already a very stressful time in your life, and then to sit there waiting for an EHCP to land in your inbox at maybe week 19, because it's supposed to be 20 weeks, of course it should land in week 19, and then it doesn't turn up, and it keeps on not turning up, is incredibly stressful and takes away parents' trust in the system. So we should be doing more to be more transparent about that. And we talk about 20 weeks it being issued in, but actually across England as a whole, 37.4% of decisions took 6 months or longer. I mean, that's just a ridiculous figure. 5.7% took a year or longer, and I think that's just completely unacceptable, and leaves parents in a very difficult place. And we need to be more honest with parents and make that information much more available to them. And I'm just going to trail my amendment to the Children's Wellbeing and Schools Bill, which actually would help to make it much more transparent for parents. Just telling them if local authorities had to publish how well they're performing against those statutory deadlines, I think it would be much better for parents, and my amendment, New Clause 3, seeks to do exactly that. So what is the impact on children? Because we must remember that these are not just random numbers that we're talking about. These are not just figures in a spreadsheet somewhere. These are real children who have real lives and real parents and real families, and they have aspirations in life as well, and we need to support them. So what does it mean for them? Well, a SEND professional wrote to me, and they said that they gave me a case of a child, they said, who is autistic, non-verbal, and has sensory processing challenges. They applied for an EHCP in October 2023. It is now January 2025, and they are still waiting for their EHCP to be issued. In the meantime, they are placed in a mainstream school with no tailored support. The result has been incredibly stressful for the child, their family, and the staff working with them. The school has now reached a point where they cannot cope, and the child is being homeschooled, isolated from peers, and without access to the specialised education they need and deserve. Another Senko, who's also a teacher, wrote to me and said, it's very frustrating the length of time it's taking for EHCPs to be finalised. Although they are backdating the funding, which is great, by the time the EHCP actually is agreed, it is often too late for parents to request school placements ready for a transition at the start of the school year, which is often what we need the EHCP for in the first place. And there is this preference for mainstream. I hear the government talk about it, we should be educating as many children as possible in mainstream, and I don't fundamentally disagree with that, except that mainstream isn't suitable for all children, and certainly when mainstream schools do not have the resources that they need to be able to provide that education and that support. So it does sound good in principle, but Contact, who's a charity for families with disabled children, wrote to me and they said, local authorities like Essex, again where I am, are reducing the provision in Section F for a child with an EHCP, as they believe that a lot of the provision in Section F comes under ordinarily available provision, which they say the school can provide as standard. All the special educational provision that a child with an EHCP needs is legally required to be stated in Section F of an EHCP. It is through Section F that there is a legal duty for local authorities to make this provision. Parents have been told by schools that there is no funding for SEND provision or ordinarily available support. How can children be reliant on SEND support when there is no funding for it? So schools are really struggling to keep up with this. This idea of mainstream ordinarily available is great, but not if the schools aren't provided with the funding that they need. And I know the government could say, well, we've increased the funding for schools. So, yes, but they've also increased the funding for, or they've also increased teacher pay, which is great. Teachers absolutely should be paid more. But they've told the schools that the teacher pay needs to be funded out of the school's budget, which makes it very difficult. Anyway, I will give way, yes.
On that point, I mean, and I must congratulate her on her preparation for this debate, especially as it's attracted so many people here, apart from, of course, the party that have created a lot of the problems that we're facing now. But, in relation to the point she's making with regard to mainstreaming and special school education, does she not agree with me that not only are many rural areas underfunded as far as the support they get, but also that they face the additional challenge of expensive home-to-school transport as well to get to that specialist provision, and there's insufficient budget for that. And that does need to be addressed if we're to have an even playing field across the country.
And I thank my honourable friend for that point, because it's really important. Now, I don't live in a rural area, so it's easy for me to overlook these issues, but I do know that this is something that many councils have been raising as an issue, and indeed Essex County Council, to be fair to them, have also raised it with me. When we talk about a root and branch reform of this system, we need to make sure it is the whole system and everything that goes with that, including this, the transport issue. So he raises an important point, and I thank him very much for that. So what is the impact on the school budget? So one primary school is funding 90 hours of learning support assistant time, LSA time, a week, because there is no EHCP and they're having to find that out of their own budget. And that's through not through lack of trying, because for a particular child they said they applied for an EHCP in January 2024, and that child's not even seen an education psychologist yet. And then, you know, the schools they tell me that they don't have the buildings and the resources to be able to safely look after the children in ordinarily available. Yes, I will give way, yes.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way, and also thank her for this important and timely debate. Even when plans are eventually in place, children and young people struggle to get suitable school places, facing hours of travel, especially in our rural areas, each day, or left at home without any appropriate education altogether. Does my honourable friend agree that funding needs to ensure provision is local, meet needs, and is well resourced?
Yes, it's very hard to disagree with that point. Of course, it needs to be. It needs to recognise what the local challenges are, and the local challenges are different in different localities. So yes, of course, that needs to happen. I thank you for raising that point. Going back to this issue of LSAs and the support that they provide in school, there are often several children in a class with EHCPs, and so therefore sometimes you need more than one LSA to support them. But it's hard to recruit LSAs because, as schools tell me, the salaries don't match the skills that are required for the LSAs. And also it's not suitable in all cases, because young people with severe special educational needs can be really, through no fault of their own, I just want to be very clear, but they can be very disruptive. And they can, unfortunately, endanger other children if they aren't properly supervised, which is why it's really important that we have these LSAs and teaching assistants and all the support staff that we need to support these children. One SENCO told me, as much as the LSA children don't need one-to-one support full-time, there are some children that really do require one or sometimes two adults with them throughout the day if everyone is to be kept safe. And for the child to have their self-care needs met in a mainstream environment. We talk a lot about schools, but this also affects further education as well, sixth form colleges, for example. And they tell me that, too much focus on the annual reviews that are done as part of the EHCP process is focused on education attainment and the progress that's been made through academic achievement, when in fact the colleges need to understand what special measures they need to put in place to prepare to best meet the needs of the children that are coming in, and that isn't necessarily about academic achievement. That is about how can they best manage the behaviour that they're exhibiting, how can they keep them safe. And they say that unfortunately EHCPs don't place enough emphasis on behaviour, and therefore they have a plea, and I hope the Minister is listening, that if we're looking at the EHC process, that we encourage focus on that as well, and not just education attainment. And also they say that some information in the annual review about behaviour is historical, which might put the sixth form colleges off from accepting those pupils, when in fact it would be perfectly appropriate, because they could be supported because their behaviour has now changed and they can support them in different ways. I also want to say something about early intervention, about how important that is. Addressing issues early on is really, really key. Some children won't need this support throughout their entire life. They may not need it through their entire school life. But getting in early, so especially speech and language issues, some of those can be helped really early on, and then once those are ameliorated, I guess I would say, made better, then the children can progress just as well as they would have done without, for children who haven't needed that additional support. So it's not just about necessarily always about long-term support. Sometimes it's about just early intervention, and then we can save money later. So, yes, of course.
It was good to hear yesterday from the APPG on SEND about the importance of early intervention, including from those from Lancashire and Cumbria, where the ICB there was doing really interesting work that was showcased there. On the back of that, I reached out to my own ICB, Suffolk and North Essex, and understand that the health response there on early interventions is quite good. Bearing in mind we both represent Essex constituencies, it would be worth the Honourable Lady looking at the ICB connected to her area, and perhaps we could work together on improving outcomes for parents, kids in Colchester and Chelmsford. Thank you.
I thank the Honourable Member for Colchester for that intervention. Of course, I would be delighted to work together on that sort of issue. And yes, and I was also at the early part of the APG on SEND, although I couldn't stay for the whole thing yesterday. And that issue of early intervention, I'm glad she raised it, because actually at the APPG there was an example that was given to us of somebody, of a child who, in this instance, had selective situational mutism. That was a particular example that was given. And the intervention that they received really early on then meant that they were then able to progress and achieve their full potential, which I thought was fabulous. And unfortunately, I have exactly the opposite example in my own constituency, where there was a child with selective mutism who didn't receive that support and is now actually not in school at all. So the importance of that support cannot be overstated. And we could talk a lot about why there have been an increase in EHCP applications. We could talk about COVID and its impact, the lack of socialisation. We could talk about the increase in, what that's led to. We could talk about lack of early intervention. And maybe some parents are asking for EHCPs as the only way to get the support that might otherwise have been ordinarily available, because schools are feeling the pressure so much. But ultimately, this is a systemic failure. And I just want to very quickly move on and just move on to some solutions, because I think one of the things that we really need to talk about, other than root and branch reform, and again this is about doing this quickly and remembering that children are growing up every single day without that support is another day when they are suffering. But we need better communication. We need communication between schools and colleges. We need better communication between local authorities and parents, between schools and parents. The list could go on, but I just want to remind everybody that communication is two-way. It's not just the local authority sending out a briefing pack. That's not good enough. We need them to be listening as well, and we need the government to be listening. We need more training. We need qualified and experienced people working with children. As a qualified and experienced SEND professional told me, people like me who are trained to work with SEND children and adults often find there is no structured role for us within councils or government systems to support schools, families or nurseries effectively. We need to be doing more about this. People who are willing to work and want to work and have amazing experience in the system, let's help them get those qualifications to help us and for them to be able to help parents and young people as well. And as Senko said, we need, as Senkos, more career path options. You know, could we have an option, for example, to fast track some training? Could there be some kind of associate ed psych qualification? I don't know, but maybe these are things that we could, that could be looked at. And we need to make it easier for parents to understand what's going on. Seriously, just back to this issue of tribunals, when local authorities are losing 99% of cases, something is seriously wrong. And I wonder whether some of those delays that the local authorities are deciding to take parents through all the way to tribunal is, if I'm being very cynical, a way to avoid having to pay the costs of providing the support to the children during that time. Finally, I'd like to close by saying I welcome the Education Select Committee's inquiry on solving the SEND crisis. I'd just like to advertise to everybody that the deadline to contribute to that inquiry is the 30th of January. But, Minister, if I may just say, at the risk of repeating myself, we really do need some action now. So I would just urge the government to work on what steps they can take right now to make children's lives better, because at the end of the day, this is about supporting children's futures. I look forward to hearing from colleagues across the House in this debate, and I thank them very, very much for taking part in this incredibly important debate.
Yeah. Okay, right, we're going to work out the time limit for everyone, because there were 34 submitted, but I think there may be even more in this room now. So it's going to be, and we will do it on the clock as well, shall we, so you can see it counting down. I think it will be 90 seconds each. And we'll... 75. Okay, the clerk's done the math. 75 seconds each, 1 minute and 15. And we will start, as a model of brevity, with Chair of the Select Committee, Helen Hayes.
Thank you, Ms. HoC. Dr. HoC, it's a pleasure to see you in the chair today. With such limited time, I will reiterate simply that we have a SEND system that is in crisis. It is letting down children, and it is letting down their families as well. It is a contested and embattled system, and such a system is no way to decide on what is in the best interests of children and to deliver what is in the best interests of children. I welcome, as the Chair of the Select Committee, some of the measures that the Government is bringing forward, but I also believe that there is further to go, and that is why, as the Select Committee, we have prioritised SEND as our first substantial new inquiry of this Parliament. I have good news for members who have constituents who are interested and concerned about this subject, which is that today we have extended the deadline for the submission of written evidence to the 6th of February. So we are serious about looking at the evidence of what is happening across the country, but also where there is good practice both in this country and overseas, and of doing our best to assist the government with setting out a programme of reform that really can deliver for children and for their families. And I urge all honourable and right honourable members who have an interest in this topic to encourage your constituents to submit evidence to our inquiry.
John Milne.
Member for calling this vital debate. EHCP provision is a national crisis, but how it plays out locally varies enormously. In East Sussex, 87% of ECHPs are issued within the 20-week target, but hop across the border to my area, West Sussex, and it's just 3.6%, which I thought was the worst statistic out there until I heard what's going on in Essex. But this is destroying people's lives. Take the example of Sarah, not her real name, from my constituency of Horsham. Sarah's son was offered a place at Crawley College, where it was claimed the post-16 SEND provision would be just right for him. But within weeks, the college said that they didn't have the resources to support him, and he didn't meet the minimum grades. He was excluded. Desperate to rescue his future, Sarah is now paying almost £500 a month for private tuition. And that's not the only cost. Her son's removal from full-time education means she no longer qualifies for the child element of universal credit, despite being his mere care provider. Sarah is a single parent on a low part-time income, and these are almost impossible obstacles to overcome. I recognise that this wasn't the present government's fault, but it is now their responsibility.
Mishra.
Thank you, Dr. HoC. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship. I'm very limited by time, so I will congratulate the member for securing this debate. But I also want to thank all teachers, parents and pupils who are struggling with this system, in particular the Bridgington Send group in my constituency, who I've met on a couple of occasions. Unfortunately, Stockport is one of the lowest funded school systems in England. Stockport does have a high proportion of EHCPs than the national average, and that is causing a lot of issues in our constituency, and I receive regular correspondence on this. The number of EHC plans in Stockport has increased by 60.4% since 2019, and Stockport is part of the F40 group, which represents the 40 local authorities with the lowest level of school funding. I just want to highlight that currently the lowest funded authority for SEND receives £950 per pupil, while the highest receives £3,250 per pupil. Stockport receives around £1,100 per pupil for SEND, and this is amongst some of the lowest nationally. The £1 billion extra funding announced by the Chancellor in the budget is very welcome, and we should reflect on the 14 harsh years of the previous administration and the coalition government. However, this extra funding must not be distributed according to existing criteria. The funding is unfair, and we need to address that, and I thank the Minister for her contribution later on.
Anna Sabine.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, for this debate. With limited time, I'd like to raise a very specific issue. My constituency of Frumeney Somerset falls under both Bath and North East Somerset and Somerset councils, meaning that there have been instances where children-specific cases, claims or tribunals fall between two different systems. One of my constituents wrote to me about their child who's 14 and has central nervous system lupus, epilepsy, ADHD and visual and sensory processing disorders. All their needs were documented by an educational psychologist who recommended they have an EHCP. Despite this medical recognition of an EHCP, as well as the diagnosis, for over a year, Bath and North East Somerset and Somerset councils went back and forth over which local authority should take responsibility for the EHCP, because the child's parents were separated, with one living in each authority, and the child split their time evenly between the two. This can't be an uncommon occurrence, and yet there were delays and stress for the family while they waited for their case to come to a tribunal. In the 15 months it's taken to resolve this issue, the child's mother estimates he's missed 1,100 lessons. Many local authorities are, of course, under immense financial strain, and I can't see how this situation can be resolved until the government relieves councils by providing them with extra funding and by making EHCP applications as simple and straightforward as possible. We're better than ever at diagnosing additional needs, but the system is woefully under-resourced to support children to thrive.
Well done.
Alistair Strathern.
Thank you, Dr. Mark. This important debate. When a child lacks the support they need to thrive at school for a single day, it's a day's potential that will forever be wasted. And the sad reality for too many children in my constituency is that too many days' potential are being wasted. This government, I think, recognised the need to move urgently on this, and the investment of £1 billion into the high needs block in the budget, as well as £750 million for school adaptations, have to be welcomed. But it's clear, looking at EHCP performance, it needs to be specific and focused work here, which is 50% delivered within the statutory timeframe across the country last year. It's a far from isolated problem. We need to make sure we've got robust improvement plans from local authorities so that all are achieving the best outcomes and not allowing that national challenge to be an excuse to tolerate failure. We need to build out that workforce strategy, and I really welcome the news from the Minister recently that we've commissioned research to make sure we've got a good understanding of the drivers of this, as well as investment into more educational psychologists. We need to make sure we're thinking through the right workforce requirements that are needed for EHCPs. It's not always apparent that an educational psychologist is needed, and it can unnecessarily delay delivery in some cases where it's not. We need to make sure too that health partners are fully prioritising this. For too long, health partners haven't always played their part, and that can't end. But fundamentally, we need to make sure we're meeting needs much earlier, so fewer children need these assessments in the first place. I know the Minister shares this ambition. I look forward to working with her to make sure we make it a reality.
Mike Martin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Since being elected in Parliament for Tunbridge Wells, my inbox has been inundated with cases of children who are not having their needs met. And this is because Kent County Council are failing in almost every regard. In 2020, 33% of EHCPs failed to meet the deadline. In 2023, only 13% made the deadline. I wanted to go through some examples, but we don't have time. So in September 22, Kent County Council was put into special measures as there were significant weaknesses in their SEND services. This was lifted in September 24, but the Minister for School Standards told me that there's further progress that KCC still needs to make, and that the Department for Education still needs to keep a close watch on Kent County Council and their SEND services. The next formal review of KCC and their SEND services happens at the end of this month, at the end of January 2025. I just remind the Minister that KCC breaches time limits in 87% of cases, misses out key pieces of information, arranges send transport too late and refuses to effectively communicate with parents. I called in November for KCC to be put back in special measures, and I reiterate that call today. This is for the children of Tunbridge Wells, but also for the children of all of us across the land.
Lizzie Collins.
Thank you, Dr. HoC. It's a pleasure to serve today under your chairship, and I'm drawn the House's attention to my register of interests as a corporate parent in Lancashire. In the last 6 months, I've had to intervene in dozens of cases of EHCP. Children in Morecambe and Loonsdale are being held back by the abject failures of the system. Now, we know we can't fix this in 6 months. It's a problem that's been building for 14 years. But I think it is fair to say what the Labour government are doing, because we are taking action. Stable, longer-term funding for local government, that is absolutely vital to making sure systems work properly and changes can be implemented properly. Changing the education department around so SEND sits with the schools ministers. Increasing education spending and including £1 billion to be earmarked specifically for SEND. And also the work we're doing on public health, on early intervention, on the wider determinants of health, on poverty. All these things together will help the SEND ecosystem. And I just hope to goodness we can get it done quickly enough for my constituents, because they are suffering right now.
Al Pinkerton.
Thank you, Dr. Harkin, and thank you, my honourable friend, for securing this debate. Parents in my constituency of Surrey Heath will know all too well the failures of Surrey County Council to deliver an effective SEND system. In 2023, only 16.2% of EHCPs were issued in the statutory 22-week period. And even though Surrey County Council now celebrates our miraculous, frankly, rise to 70% issuance of EHCPs in the statutory 22 weeks in the latter half of 2024, parents tell me that those EHCPs are coming back with the wrong name, the wrong date of birth, describing the wrong conditions, and offering inappropriate packages of support. And of course, it's parents, families and children who suffer the consequences of it. My constituents tell me that some of their children have attempted to take their own lives. Other parents have had to leave full-time employment in order to become permanent carers for their children, which is bad for them, bad for their families, bad for their family finances, and indeed bad for the economy. Timeliness and quality are not mutually exclusive, but are essential components of good EHCPs, and our children deserve better, as do the families, the educators and the professionals who are becoming permanent advocates on their behalf. Thank you.
Andy McNay.
Thank you, Dr. Huck. Just in issues of time, just to endorse so many comments made today, and it is fantastic to see the passion and commitments of so many members here, but also, frankly, of the government from day one since we've been in. In the interest of time, I'll focus down on just one issue. My constituency of Rosendale and Darwen spans two local authority areas. One, a small unitary authority of Blackburn with Darwen, the other, the Shire County of Lancashire. 100% of my EHCP cases are in Lancashire. 100%, and this demonstrates a stark and completely unacceptable postcode lottery. Now, there's absolutely no doubt that money is an absolutely fundamental issue here, but we also have to raise the question about to what extent culture and attitude and systems actually matter. Time and time again, I hear from families a feeling that the whole system is just set up to fail. You're set up to stop them. You're getting these plans. And so, as well as addressing those fundamental funding issues, I very much hope as a government we will be addressing those cultural, systemic issues as well, and giving our families in Rosendale and Darwen and all of our constituencies the support they desperately need.
Liz Jarvis.
Thank you, Dr. Huck. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship. And I'm grateful to the Honourable Member for Chelmsford for securing this important debate. Every time I talk to a parent in my constituency of Eastleigh whose child has special educational needs, they tell me how they spend a huge amount of time fighting for the support their child needs, including EHCPs. One mum told me about the difficulties she was experiencing trying to get an EHCP for her 9-year-old son. She said she felt powerless, battling a system which was slow, unresponsive and incredibly difficult to navigate. After doing everything she could to get her son back in school, in the end she had to take her case to a tribunal, adding to the stress on her family. Thankfully, her son was granted an EHCP, but it shouldn't be the case that parents are having to fight a broken system and go through a tribunal just to get the children the education they deserve. EHCPs were designed to provide tailored support, but they can only succeed if there is an end to the postcode lottery, the system is properly funded, staffed and focused on the needs of children and their families.
Phil Brickell.
Thank you, Dr. Bucket. Your chairship. From my own visits to schools across my Bolton West constituency, I know how much concerns around special educational needs and disabilities play on the minds of teachers, teaching assistants, parents and school governors. Only last week, indeed, I was with Chris Howarth, the head at Washacre Primary Academy in West Horton, and Chair of Governors Phil Orth, who took me for a tour of their school and outlined the work they're doing to support children with special educational needs and the challenges staff manage in the classroom. I want to put on the record my thanks to Chris and Phil, plus all the staff and governors at Washacre Primary for their hard work. Bolton currently has 8,961 children and young people diagnosed with SEND, which is a 20% increase over the last 7 years, and the number of ECHPs has nearly doubled since 2018 to 3,645 across the borough. In terms of council compliance in issuing ECHPs within 20 weeks, that has increased from 38% to 71% in 2024, and while the direction of travel is positive, that does mean almost 1/3 of parents and children are still being let down. With that in mind, I very much welcome the government's new investment in family hubs in early years, with the Chancellor's autumn budget in October setting aside £1 billion in additional funding for SEND support, and I thank the Minister for her continued endeavours in this regard.
Sarah Green.
Thank you, Dr. Only 49% of children in Buckinghamshire received their EHC plan within the statutory limit. That means more than half are waiting way beyond that time frame. And there are hidden impacts to these delays. One family in my constituency is facing a 3-year wait list for ASD and ADHD assessments. There are serious concerns about their current accommodation, but that lack of a formal diagnosis for their son is delaying their eligibility for suitable housing. That's 3 years with no additional support and in unsuitable housing. I've also spoken to schools in my area who say they have children with EHCPs who would be better served in a specialist setting. Due to the demand for places, they remain in mainstream education where, in the words of one local head teacher, the SENCO workload is unsustainable for staff. The Department for Education's own survey showed that only 63% of classroom teachers felt able to meet the needs of pupils with SEND. So I'm keen to hear from the Minister today what work is ongoing to help give the current teaching workforce the training and confidence they need to meet this demand in our mainstream schools.
Lee Ingham.
Thank you, Dr. The last Conservative Education Secretary described SEND as a lose-lose situation, and under the previous government she was right. I have a case in Stafford, now my constituency, where 2 parents are moving house to a different area. Both of them have additional needs. One has an EHCP, the other is in a mainstream school. For the child with an EHCP, they're being told that whilst moving from Stafford to Cheshire, they have to retain a place in their current school, which is around an hour's drive each way. The other child, who attends mainstream school, has had her pick of schools, has chosen where she'd like to go, and is looking forward to her future. The child with an EHCP has been left in limbo. The difference in experience for those children is night and day, and the stress it's caused their parents is completely unnecessary. This is precisely why we need to change the way that EHCPs are handled. I would say that this government cannot undo the last 14 years of disruption to our SEND system in 6 months. The investment we've seen recently is incredibly welcome, and I look forward to the Minister telling us more about that.
Alison Bennett.
Thank you, Dr. Hutt. I would like to thank my honourable friend for bringing this really important debate. I won't repeat what colleagues have said about the impact on children, but what I will say instead is about the impact on teachers and how the current EHCP system is grossly unfair on teachers who are expected to cope with this. I recently visited the Gattons Infant School in Burgess Hill. Being an infant school, it is just 3 years, and 4-year-olds arrive at that school clearly with unmet needs. And quite often, those children have already left the school before the EHCP has been processed by West Sussex County Council. That's clearly unfair on those children. It's clearly unfair on the children who do not have special educational needs that are not yet diagnosed. And it is unfair on the teachers to expect them to be able to cope with a classroom of 30 children, a significant number of who have needs that are not being met. So in conclusion, it is absolutely essential that this is turned around with urgency, and I thank the government for all they're doing.
Danny Beales.
Thank you, Dr. Hutt. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship, and thank you to the member for bringing this important debate today. To be frank, SEND support in Hillingdon is poor, and it's getting worse. In Hillingdon, there's been a 40% drop in the number of families getting their determination from the HCP within the 20-week statutory limit since 2015, and the situation is worsening. Conservative funding cuts locally, a lack of planning for specialist places, rising demand, a shortage of specialists have all contributed to increasing waiting times and poor provision. And unfortunately, the situation is only going to get worse. Hillingdon are proposing this year a £7 million cut to local schools and potentially next year too, which goes against the principles of mainstream inclusion, against the principles of collaboration in the education system, and it will undoubtedly make this deficit and this situation worse. And I hope Hillingdon Council will think again and the department hold them to account to do so. I also want to raise specifically the issue of homeless and displaced families. I've been contacted recently by a number of families fleeing domestic violence, experiencing homelessness, moving within the HCP into the borough, but the borough not taking up their duty of care and providing support. And it's simply unfair for families to have to go back to the start of the EHC process. So I asked the Minister, we've heard quite compellingly today about these issues in a number of places, what support is in place to ensure system improvement, to hold local leaders to account so that children in Hillingdon can no longer be failed? Thank you.
Monica Harding.
Thank you, Chair. It's a pleasure to serve under the chairmanship, and may I pay tribute to my honourable friend for bringing this debate. Esher and Walton, my surgeries are full of distraught parents of SEND children. In Surrey, 1,800 children missing education because they cannot get provision. Children waiting an average of 2 years for an ADHD diagnosis. Surrey, in the bottom for getting EHCPs in on time. Surrey, near the top of numbers of parents coming to a tribunal. Ed Sykes, assessing children by Zoom, sometimes not even meeting the child. Children in the wrong tier and in tribunals, maybe because it costs less in the short term, lack of places in specialist environment, lack of provision in a mainstream environment. Money diverted from schools' budgets and therefore from all children. So root and branch reform, yes. And proper funding, yes. But also, surely, there must be government accountability of local authority provision, where in Surrey we are so poorly served.
Alison Hume.
Thank you, Dr. Huck. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship, and I congratulate the member for Chelmsford for securing this debate. In the Scarborough and Whitby constituency, there are over 100 children and young people classified as elected home educated, which includes 30 with EHCPs, and we know there's many more unaccounted for. There must be a genuine question mark whether that is a genuine choice to home educate or due to their child not getting the support they need. One family in Scarborough reluctantly withdrew their child from a mainstream school as their needs were not being met despite having an EHCP. The child's mother had to give up work to homeschool, which took a toll on her health and the family finances. I warmly welcome the government's commitment to addressing the SEND crisis, but I would like to encourage the Minister to use the register of children and young people not in school, introduced under the New Children Wellbeing at Schools Bill, to gather the evidence that we really need to understand why those children and young people are not in school.
Thank you, Dr. Huck. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I want to thank the honourable member for bringing this important debate. Like many, I've spent considerable time with leaders in local schools and parents who have told, frankly, harrowing stories about children not being able to meet needs and resources being at breaking point. My constituency of Bournemouth West, 23% of children have special education needs, and whilst there has been great strides made by the council to get children onto the EHCPs they need, at one stage 88% of all children were waiting more than 20 weeks for these. There are two things that I wanted to bring up which parents have brought to me. The first is that even once they get these EHCP plans in place, they are poorly constructed, as we've heard. One parent saying that they're not worth the paper they're written on.
Parents are being told there are no resources to deliver the support their children need. One parent was told she needed £25,000 a year of one-to-one support for her child, but was only offered £6,000 a year from the council. And they lack planning and the follow-up that parents need to really deliver these in their local schools. The second thing that has been very significant is the impact on education outcomes and mental health of the children who are not receiving the support that they need. As we've heard from other honourable members, several have attempted suicide. Almost every case we've had, the children have ended up referred to CAMS with serious mental health issues. School absenteeism is increasing with long-term knock-on effects. As a result, parents feel punished for a system when really they just want the best for their children, and they feel like they have to fight all the time. So I want to welcome our focus, the government's focus. Thank you.
Charlotte Kane.
And I congratulate my honourable friend for bringing this debate. Like many others, I've been horrified by the level of correspondence I get about this issue. And just this month, I was contacted by a constituent with a child who was well supported at school and looking to do well in their GCSEs, but the school can no longer provide for them, and they're now only getting 11 hours of tuition. The school asked 3 times for them to get a EHCP assessment, and they were always refused. My constituent went to tribunal, at which point the council finally said they would do the assessment. That was last September, still not been done. So now we have a child unable to access the education they need to achieve their full potential. Parents or other responsible adults spend hours of time, energy, and even money trying to get the support that their child needs. Local authorities deliver what they can, building up vast debts currently hidden from their accounts, and their staff feel under siege, and the correspondence often lacks clarity and transparency, let alone empathy. And most importantly, the children and young people are let down day in, day out by the very structures that are supposed to help them achieve their potential.
Can I remind people to bob if they answer, then we'll work out exactly how long. Lawrence Turner.
Thank you, Dr. HoC. And in the seconds available, I cannot do justice to the cases I've heard of pupils and parents who are stuck in a system. But 10 years on from the passing of the Children and Families Act, it is time to look at where the current system is failing. Local authorities had additional responsibilities loaded onto them at the same time that their powers and resources were taken away, and their ability to plan shared resources has become harder, and that in itself is a major cause of delays and cost increases in the system. I draw attention to my declarations and registered interests and membership of the GMB when I say that we cannot lose sight of the role of school support staff in this equation. And if I can make one appeal to the opposition front bench, it is this: please do rethink the opposition to the reinstatement of the school support staff negotiating body. Classroom-based school support staff spend the majority of their time supporting SEND learners. We cannot resolve the SEND crisis without also resolving those workforce problems. Dr. HoC, I am proud to have been a SEND pupil myself, and I'm open about my differences as an MP, and I just hope on a cross-party basis at the end of this Parliament we can look back and say we found a system in crisis and we did change it.
Helen Maguire.
Thank you, Dr. HoC. This crisis is failing children, exhausting parents and overwhelming schools, not least in my constituency of Epsom and Ewell. Over the past 6 years, Surrey County Council's timeliness of issuing EHCPs within 20 weeks has plummeted from 57.6% in 2017 to 16.2% in 2023. An excessive focus on meeting deadlines appears to have also undermined the quality of the EHCPs themselves. Decisions are increasingly being appealed, with parents winning 98.3% of these appeals in Surrey last year. Local teachers, head teachers have also highlighted to me that EHCPs are often not accurately reflecting the children's needs as well, leading to inappropriate placements. These children often become dysregulated and disruptive, affecting staff wellbeing and the learning environment for other pupils. They also reported that some assessments are being conducted remotely. How can such assessments accurately capture a child's need through an online assessment? Parents are also increasingly be asking head teachers to exclude their own children, believing exclusion might be the only way to secure appropriate care, a devastating indictment of the system. This is a failing system at every single stage, leaving children and families in absolute crisis. Without urgent reform, we risk failing a generation of children. Every child deserves a chance to succeed, and it's our responsibility to ensure no child is left behind.
Pam Cox.
Thank you, Dr. Park, and I thank the Honourable Member for Chelmsford for securing this debate today. As she said, Essex County Council is one of the worst performing local authorities in the country for delivering on EHCP. And it's very vital that we hear from the front line. We hear from parents, teachers and educators and assessors. I held a round table in Colchester recently with those groups on these issues, and I'm very delighted to say those participants are now sharing their experiences through the inquiry being held by the Education Select Committee. So I would urge the Minister to pay close attention to that evidence, to their voices, and to bring the change that we so badly need.
Clive Jones.
It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship, Dr. HoC, and well done to my honourable friend, Member for Cheltenham, for securing this debate. Chelmsford, sorry. The cost of SEND provision for Wokingham Borough Council is incredibly high, with huge impact on our council's budget, which frequently contributes to situations where parents' expectations and sometimes elements of the EHCP cannot be met, with all of the consequences that come with this. Despite costs rising, Wokingham Borough Council is set to lose another £1 million of funding under the current draft local government settlement scheme, when Wokingham is already the lowest funded unitary authority in England. What are Minister's thoughts on how the government will help a council like Wokingham? And will the Minister meet with me and representatives from Wokingham Borough Council to discuss the challenges that we face locally when it comes to funding SEND provision? And will the And are there any plans to review the process of producing EHCPs to make them more user-friendly and therefore leading to greater efficiency and effectiveness?
Rachel Gilmore.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I'd also like to commend my friend, the member for Chelmsford, for securing this debate. It's very encouraging to see so many parliamentary colleagues, but I have to comment on the notable absence of those who should be here and be held accountable. As a member of the Public Accounts Committee, we have recently published a report into support for children with educational needs. I've observed this report closely, and I was deeply saddened by what we found over the course of that inquiry. I represent a constituency which is 69% Somerset, 31% Devon. The Somerset side issues 42.1% of EHCPs within the 20-week requirement. It's a Liberal Democrat controlled council. The Devon side, which is a Conservative controlled council, only manages less than 5%. The government, in consultation with local authorities and those who use and rely on this system, need to urgently review the infrastructure in place to support EHCPs, the systems available to assess and issue them, and what the future provision of this system will look like, so that we can actually start to get this right on a regional and national level. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Steph Aquarone.
Thank you to both. Please be aware of my members' register of interests. Conservative-controlled Norfolk County Council is failing too many SEND children. Moreover, the Conservative government failed SEND children, but the system is also failing children and families, and Norfolk wants to be part of the solution. There are many settings worthy of national best practice exemplification for the way that they are supporting high incidence of SEND without needing to refer to EHCPs. The Council are keen for the Department for Education to use Norfolk as a test bed for innovative solutions to the crisis in SEND, and our country is keen and eager to be a big player in the national conversation around the important transformation that must come to the way these services currently function. I would be incredibly grateful if the Minister would take the time to meet with myself, Norfolk County Council and others to discuss the challenges we face and, more importantly, how we can help. I have pledged to those who've got in touch with me to tell me their stories and challenges in the SEND system that I will keep fighting for them. Thank you.
Ben Maguire.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship, and I thank the Honourable Member for Chelmsford for securing this really important debate today. I welcome the drive for diversity in our mainstream schools, but we also need to make sure we provide specialist provision for our children. And I just draw the Minister's attention to one primary school in my North Cornwall constituency, which has had to repurpose their staff room for 2 Year 7 SEND students who don't have a school place at the moment. I do have some good news. We have a new SEND school coming to Bodmin in the North Cornwall constituency, which will hold between 60 and 70 SEND students. But with hundreds on the wait list, this barely touches the sides. And just very briefly, I'll set out one such student who's on that list called James, who's endured delay after delay with no clear answers, no certainty, and very little support. His mother got in touch with me in a desperate plea for help and said, "The system is utterly devastating for our young people. My son has been completely let down." James's parents are now looking to see if they have to sell their house as they've provided private schooling provision. Funding is key to this. Cornwall ranks 142 out of 151 in per pupil funding, and Cornwall Council currently has a 41 million deficit for SEND.
Vicky Slade.
Thank you, Chair. A pleasure to serve under your chairship. The current system is creating a horrendous conflict environment and a depressing, stressful professional working experience for teachers and support staff too. Parents are spending their lives fighting, costing their own mental health and their livelihoods, and councils are on the brink of resisting this because they simply can't cope with more. Far from early diagnosis adding to the strain, we believe more investment can save money, reassure parents and ensure schools and councils understand better the needs of the children coming through the system. I've been contacted by so many parents but simply want to share what Rachel from Wimborne told me. She said, "As a preschooler, there is a chance to give my daughter a full education, but the Dorset Child Development Centre is drowning in referrals with a 2-year wait for speech and language referrals. Her mum's a teacher and she said the red tape around autism and other neurodivergent conditions is ridiculous. Why do they have to go to child development when their needs are so severe it's obvious to other educational health professionals? I have sent the Minister details of an exciting pilot scheme at Broadstone Middle School and I look forward to hearing about a meeting soon. But does the Minister agree with me that SEND children are entitled to the same quality of life and happy childhood as everybody else? Yeah.
It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship, and can I join my colleagues in commending my honourable friend, the member for Chelmsford, for securing this debate on this important topic. And I agree it's good to see so many people here from both the Labour and the Liberal Democrat benches, but as they say on Radio 4, it creates a challenge of delivering my remarks in just a minute. According to Oxfordshire County Council, in the last 10 years, in the county of my constituency, the number of EHCPs has doubled from 3,000 to 7,000. And the deficit of high needs funding in Oxfordshire is estimated at £21.3 million. But of course, that's in the wider national context of an estimated £3.16 billion deficit in England. And whilst the £1 billion extra allocated by the Chancellor in the budget is welcome, it clearly doesn't go far enough. I want to use the example of St Blaise Primary School in Milton, just to show the wider context around some of these problems. This school was bitterly disappointed to hear that they couldn't access the mental health support teams. But in an example of a postcode lottery, with children just a few minutes up the A34 being able to access that support. And of course, the child and adult mental health waiting list is ever growing and feels out of reach, making it difficult to provide that wider support for children. So I join my colleagues in calling on the government to tackle the crisis in SEND funding by giving local authorities extra funding. Please do that to support our children, our parents and our teachers and their assistants.
Manuela Partigello.
Thank you, Dr. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship. In my constituency of Stratford-on-Avon, I have heard from numerous parents and carers how they are constantly battling, some waiting years to get their children assessed for EHCPs. This leaves families in limbo, often forcing them into lengthy and stressful tribunal processes. With schools unable to meet the needs of children, children are left without educational support while they wait for their assessment. We urgently need a long-term funding plan for the whole SEND process, from early years to post-16 education. A robust accountability for local authorities, sufficient school places supported by well-trained staff to ensure all children, no matter where they live, can access the education they deserve.
Julie Minns.
Thank you, Dr. Holt, and thank you very much for accommodating me this afternoon.
Education shouldn't be this devastating or exhausting, but that is what all of our constituents feel when it comes to finding adequate provision for their children with specialist needs. I want to talk about one specific aspect of that. It is not the exhaustion of actually getting the EHCP, though that is devastating for the families. When armed with that, as in the case of one of my constituents, the exhaustion began in trying to get the school on whose roll their child was enrolled to agree to the 1 day a week provision that that parent had identified as being suitable for their child. The first step for getting that child back into that school, and yet the school could not or would not agree to allow that provision to be paid for under the EHCP. So it's not just about fixing the bureaucracy around EHCP. It is also about ensuring that the support is there and the encouragement is there for our schools to meet the educational needs that parents know is right for their children.
Last backbencher, Jack Abbott.
Thank you, Dr. Huck, and thank you for your excellent chairship today, which has seen everybody being able to contribute, so thank you. While this is a national issue, SEND services in Ipswich and Suffolk have been in a desperate state for more than a decade. And like everywhere else, we need specialist places, we need specialist professionals, and we really welcome the massive boost in funding provided by the government. However, as our honourable members from across this chamber have said today, culture and accountability is absolutely crucial as well. And in my view, one of the ways where we can start injecting a little bit more accountability and scrutiny into the system is reviewing the ombudsman process, which being referred to today as combative, complex and exhausting for so many families. Tribunal hearings in particular, they are held in public, but only in exceptional circumstances. And given that around 95%, if not more, tribunals find in favour of the families, I would say that all cases should be now heard in public, and I would urge the Minister to not only look at the ombudsman process in full, but also particularly those tribunal hearings as well. Thank you.
Okay, first of the front benchers, Munira Wilson for the Lib Dems.
Thank you very much, Dr. Huck. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. Can I congratulate my honourable friend, the member for Chelmsford, very warmly for securing this important debate. It has struck me there have been a number of debates on SEND in this Parliament since the general election, and every single one that I've been to has certainly been blockbuster, absolute sellout, and people struggling to get in. And I think that is testament to the fact, and I say this looking at the Minister, that pretty much every member, which is why I'm so shocked that there are no Conservative backbenchers here today, their inboxes are just full of casework with heartbreaking stories of families up and down the country trying to access the support they deserve and the support that they need. These are some of the most vulnerable children in our society, and it is incumbent upon us to ensure that they get the support that they need. Now, today's debate is very specifically about education, health and care plans, which were introduced in 2014, and the vision behind them was to bring both health and care together into one plan that would follow that child up to the age of 25, obviously being regularly renewed and updated, setting out the support that they needed and providing those assurances to both the parents and the pupil involved. But as we all know far too well, and we've heard the stats today, the system has become overwhelmed, demand has soared, and frankly the resourcing has not kept up with that demand, and the whole system is creaking at the seams. Today, for too many children with SEND and their parents and carers, just getting an EHCP, if they manage to, will feel like a significant victory. Their families fight their corner, knowing that without an EHCP, the support they need just won't materialise, and yet even when an EHCP is granted, we often know that that isn't always a guarantee of support. Certainly my casework that I see is less so about the waiting times and actually much more about the delivery of what is laid out in that plan. And part of that is because there's such a severe shortage of special school places right across the country. Now, the previous Conservative government did promise us a number more special schools. They were very slow to deliver on these, and I welcome the measures in the Children's Wellbeing in Schools Bill that will allow local authorities, where there is need, to open special schools, because I know a number of local authority applications have been rejected in recent years. And in the meantime, without that specialist provision, the costs of transporting children well out of area to appropriate provision, or indeed sending children to independent special schools, some of which are private equity run, profiteering at local authorities' expense, is just shocking. And of course, there's also a number of children with special needs who are missing from school just because they're not having their needs met. So, but coming back to the delays and the fight, we've heard so much today about that conflict. You know, parents shouldn't have to go through that process, the stress that it puts on them, the strain, and it's unacceptable that, you know, almost every single EHCP appeal that is brought to tribunal is decided in favour of the appellant. And as I've said, parents are carrying the cost and the stress of that battle, and local authorities are spending further millions losing these cases. And my honourable friend, the member for Mid Sussex, talked about the impact of delays on school staff as well as on parents. I mean, I hear this time and again, actually, when I speak to school governors, to head teachers and teachers in my constituency, that whilst children who perhaps should be in a different setting are waiting for an EHCP in a mainstream setting, sometimes their behaviour may cause safeguarding issues with other children. Sometimes teachers are injured in the process, teaching assistants, as I think she pointed out, and learning support assistants who are paid a very low salary are often just driven out of the profession. Now, so some of these delays, as a number of members and honourable members have commented on, are caused by a shortage of educational psychologists. And I also hear, talking to my own local authority, that this is sometimes the delays from their side is because of the lack of cooperation from NHS partners. And so I very much support my honourable friend's new clause 3 that she's tabled in the Children and Wellbeing Bill to bring transparency to the timeliness of EHCPs with local authorities. I'd urge the government to go one step further and say, well, where these are breached, we need that explanation, and so that we can have transparency on where those delays are being caused, because we know that sunlight is the best disinfectant, and we need to put pressure on all partners in the system to keep to their responsibilities in ensuring that every child gets an EHCP in a timely manner. And we've heard today that this waiting game is a real postcode lottery. While some local authorities perform reasonably well against the 20-week limit, we've heard that in Surrey, for example, just 16% of EHCPs were issued on time in 2023, and in Essex, less than 1%. I mean, it's just shocking. We've heard time and again today, Madam Chair, that the system is failing and needs urgent whole system reform. And that reform must include addressing the financial barriers and disincentives that prevent children from being identified, included and supported without having to fight for it. And that's why we, the Liberal Democrats, are calling for increased funding for local authorities to reduce that notional amount that schools are expected to pay towards supporting a child with special needs before applying for an EHCP. I think this would be an important step forward, because too often I hear from head teachers in my constituency who are trying to do the right thing, that parents come to them because a school down the road has whispered in their ear, well, actually, if you go to that school, they're much better at delivering for SEND children. And so I think, and that comes down to the fact that so much of the support needs to be delivered out of the school's budget, because we know that £6,000 threshold is only notional. And so we need to address that disincentive in the system. And I would say to the Minister gently, because she was disagreeing when my honourable friend made the point about school budgets being strained further still by teacher pay rises having to be found out of efficiencies. The Secretary of State has written to the STRB saying that pay rises will need to be found out of school efficiencies. I can tell the Minister, and she's met some of my constituents who are school governors, that our schools do not have any efficiencies left. Okay, so our schools are asking parents to buy glue sticks, they're cutting teaching assistant posts, which is affecting special needs provision, and they're cutting school trips, and they've cut. So there is no fat in the system. And if her vision is to make our mainstream schools more inclusive, that has to come with the financial support to deliver it, and delivering teacher pay rises out of those budgets is just not possible. So I hope she'll address that point in her wind-up remarks. I would also urge the government to look at a national body for very high needs, for children with very, very high needs, so that we don't have a postcode lottery where there is a particularly high needs child in one local authority and the budget there is put under significant strain. By having a national dedicated body for those children, that would be very helpful for those high needs. We also need to improve early identification through better training of staff. That early identification, that training needs to start right down from the early years, not deep into primary school or even secondary school, as we often find. And one last point I would make to the Minister is we need to provide clarity to local authorities. We know from the NAO report their finances are on the brink. 43% of them, their finances are on the brink. A £3.3 billion deficit is projected. The £1 billion announced in the budget is welcome. We've still not heard how that's going to be allocated. It won't even touch the sides of the black hole I've just mentioned. We know the statutory override, this accounting trick that allows local authorities to keep their SEND deficits off the balance sheet, is due to end in 2026, but we don't know what's going to happen after that. So perhaps she can provide some clarity on that. And I know from my meetings with her, as I say, she met some of my school governors, and we're very grateful to her for that time. And we discussed mainly the SEND issues that their experience is. I know it's on her, high on her list of issues to tackle, but I say to her again, this issue is urgent. There is nothing in the Children's Wellbeing and Schools Bill, really, on tackling this issue. We need whole system reform. Our children cannot afford to wait.
For the Conservative Shadow Minister, Laura Trott.
Well, thank you, Dr Huck, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship as ever. And I congratulate the member for Chelmsford on securing this debate today and her excellent speech. It is very obvious from everybody who's spoken how much distress the delay in EHCPs are causing across the system. And I think what is equally striking is the postcode lottery, which has been mentioned a few times. We know that 15 local authorities completed less than 10% of their new AHCPs within the 20-week time limit. But 27 local authorities completed over 90% within 20 weeks. This is a very stark difference, which I have not seen properly explained anywhere. So I hope that as part of the work that the Minister is doing in the department, there is some analysis of why these differences are quite so big. They cannot be explained away just by volume. Obviously, COVID has had a huge influence on these issues, but the problems that we're discussing today aren't new. In 2009, in the final report of his inquiry, Brian Lamb called for a radical overhaul of the SEND system. He cited a culture of low expectations and a system that failed to deliver what children needed. Now, the coalition government, which was referred to by a couple of members, brought forward the Children and Families Act in 2014, which tried to address some of these shortcomings. But the changes, with changes that I think most people here would agree with, bringing together the education and health system, trying to make it more child-focused, make parents have more of a role in decision-making. And it was intended that needs would be identified earlier. But Ofsted's SEND inspection found that many local authorities just struggle to implement these properly, and as a result there's been a huge postcode lottery which we've seen reflected. And layered on that has been the explosion of numbers post-COVID. We know that many children with complex needs just did not attend school during COVID, and they missed support at school, Ofsted found, which has led to some of the very distressing cases that we've heard today. In government, we increased high needs budget by more than 60% from 2019 to 2024, but we're still seeing these huge issues. So I'd be interested to know from the Minister that the previous government pledged the improvement plan for SEND. I completely understand that she's delayed this to have a look at it further, but can I ask her the timetable for bringing forward an alternative and what she's going to do with that? The member for Birmingham Northfield talked about the school staff pay negotiation body. Now, actually, one of the concerns that I have about this, and the reason that we've opposed it, is that it will actually affect SEND provision. The Confederation of School Trusts said that school trusts, and I'm quoting this, school trusts do not operate in the same way, and we must ensure that schools of all types can benefit from the flexibility to deploy staff that most benefit pupils. The reforms needed on our special educational needs system rely on this, for example. I'll happily give way.
Lawrence Turner.
Thank you, Chair, and I'm very grateful for her for giving way. Will she acknowledge that the CST said that it is the right time to take school support staff pay out of the local authority umbrella, and that their concern was that a ceiling was going to be set on school support staff pay, and it has been clarified in committee, Employment Rights Bill Committee, that that is not the case. The policy is about establishing a floor, not a ceiling.
I acknowledge absolutely. I thank the honourable member for his intervention. I acknowledge absolutely that pay was part of that, but it was also about terms and conditions and flexibility, which I don't think we've seen adequately addressed in this to date. But I'm grateful for his engagement on this issues, and indeed the Minister's engagement on this issues, and I really hope this is really important that we get this right, because we will need that extra flexibility, I think, as we go through with the reforms that the government, I hope, will be bringing forward. I would also like to know what we had the discussion at the beginning from the member for Chelmsford about the Minister's approach to mainstream education and the recognition that mainstream education is not right for every child. And I think that whilst it is always right and proper that where parents want to send their child to a mainstream school, they should be given the opportunity to do that, and there should be the facilities there for that to take place. They should also have the option of a special school if that is what parents prefer. So we've heard a lot about mainstream schooling, and I completely understand that, and as I said, I support that where it's the parents' wish. But can the Minister also confirm that they support special school places and will increase the number of special school places where that is the parents' wish? Because I think there's been concern about some groups that it's going to be forced in one direction rather than the other, and I think choice needs to be at the heart of this system, so I'd be grateful if she can confirm that today. I also have questions around the statutory override, which were raised by the shadow from the Lib Dem side, and I'd be grateful if she could respond on that as well. I'm conscious of time, and I was about to wrap up just because I'm conscious of time, and I want to make sure that the member has time to speak at the end. So I'll close my remarks there.
For His Majesty's Government, Minister Catherine McKinnell.
Thank you. And thank you, Dr Hupp, and it's a pleasure to serve under you as Chair. And I congratulate the Honourable Member for Chelmsford on securing this important debate and for the powerful contributions that all members have made. You are great in number, your time was short, but your voices were very much heard, and you have been listened to, and you have done your constituents, who I know are facing significant challenges in relation to this issue, justice in your contributions today. Improving the special educational needs and disabilities system across the country is a priority for this government. This includes improving the experience of the education, health and care plan process for children and young people and their families. And we are clear that the SEND system requires reform, and we are working with families, schools, local authorities and partners to deliver improvements so that children and their families can access the support that they need. There are no quick fixes. Some of these issues are very deep-rooted in our system, but we absolutely agree that change is needed urgently. And as a government that is absolutely committed to breaking down opportunities, breaking down barriers to opportunities for all children and young people, and indeed all people, the way to do that is to ensure that children and young people do get the right support to succeed in their education. And as I think the Honourable Lady asked me if I agreed that they should lead happy, fulfilling lives, and absolutely I do. And there are over 1.6 million pupils in England who have special educational needs, and as one report after another tells us, the SEND system is not providing the support that they and their families need. And while high needs funding for children and young people with complex special educational needs and disabilities continues to rise, confidence in the SEND system remains very low. Tribunal rates are increasing, as does waiting times for the support that children and young people desperately need and deserve. And worst of all, outcomes for children with special educational needs are suffering. Just 1 in 4 pupils achieve expected standards at the end of primary school, that's out of all children, with children with special educational needs falling behind their peers and struggling to reach the expected levels in fundamental reading, writing and math skills. We are committed to changing the system. and families we know are battling against it at the moment to get the support for their children. We are determined to restore parents' trust that their child will get the support they need to thrive and flourish, regardless of their additional needs or disabilities. And I absolutely, and as a government, we absolutely appreciate this cannot wait. As a matter of urgency, we will do this by improving inclusivity and expertise in mainstream schools, and in honourable answer to the right honourable lady's question, whilst also ensuring that special schools can cater to those with the most complex needs. Effective early identification and intervention, I absolutely agree, is key to reducing the impact that a special educational need or disability may have in the long term. This government knows this, and it's why in July last year we announced the extension of funded support for 11,100 schools registered on the Nuffield Early Language Intervention Programme, helping pupils who need that extra support with their speech and language development to find their voice. And we're also investing in the system, £1 billion into the special educational needs and disability system, £740 million for councils to create more specialist places in mainstream schools, and our curriculum and assessment review is looking at the barriers that hold children back from having the best chance in life. But we cannot do it alone. We will continue to work with the sector to ensure that our approach is fully planned and delivered, together with parents, schools, councils and the expert staff that we know go above and beyond to support children. And I said it before, I will say it again, there are no quick fixes here, but we are getting on with the job, and we remain committed and determined to deliver the change that children and young people and their families are crying out for. I will give way.
Thank you to the Minister for giving way, and I do appreciate the work she is doing to address this issue and that there are not quick fixes. But given the terrible cases we've heard today, and I have one constituent who had to wait 2 years for an assessment which spanned the whole length of their GCSE courses, does she agree with the points that have been made that the funding that's been allocated so far, given council debts on this issue, will hardly touch the sides in terms of the capacity that's needed on SEND?
Minister.
I will come to the issue, to the way in which we are seeking to address this, because I appreciate the extent of the issues and the challenge that the honourable gentleman raises. But I think the fundamental point here is that the additional funding that is being spent isn't actually getting the outcomes that children deserve. And that's why we fundamentally need to reform the system to both improve the process for families and children and the outcomes for children as well. Because the number of education, health and care plans has increased year on year since our introduction in 2014, with nearly 600,000 children and young people with an EHCP as of January last year. And EHCPs, as various honourable members have referenced, were introduced as a way of minimising the bureaucracy and time-consuming nature of accessing vital support for children and young people with special educational needs and disabilities, to allow them the opportunities they deserve to achieve and thrive. But over time, flaws and lack of capacity in the system to meet the lower level need has added additional strain on specialist services, and it's had a detrimental impact on those experiencing trying to access support through the HCP process. And it has led, as many honourable members have outlined, to late identification of need and intervention, low parental confidence in the ability of mainstream settings to meet need, inefficient allocation of resources in the system, and inconsistency in practice and provision based on geographical location, all of which have contributed to pushing up costs and creating an increasingly unsustainable system. The latest data we hold shows that in 2023, just 50.3% of new HCPs were issued within the 20-week statutory timeframe. And I appreciate, as the Honourable Member for Chelmsford set out, it can be much worse in some areas. And it does leave children and young people and their families for weeks, months, and in some cases years without appropriate and adequate support. So the government wants to ensure that EHC needs assessments are progressed promptly and plans are issued quickly in order to provide children and young people with the support that they need so that they can achieve those positive outcomes. And we're aware that local authorities have felt this increased demand for EHCPs and the subsequent demand for workforce capacity increases. And we recognise that more efficient and effective service delivery and communication with schools and families is pivotal to both rebuilding and reforming the system. So department officials are continuously monitoring and working alongside local authorities to support those that are having issues with timely processing of EHCPs. And for those who are struggling to process and issue EHCPs within the 20-week statutory timeframe and face challenges in making the required improvements to do so, the department continues to put in place recovery plans with the aid of specialist SEND advisors where necessary. And the government is absolutely aware of the challenges that families are facing in accessing support for children and young people through this long and difficult and adversarial EHCP process. Independently commissioned insights that we published last year showed that extensive improvements to the system and using early intervention, as the Honourable Lady also mentioned, and better resourcing of mainstream schools would have a significant impact on children and young people with SEND who are in need of support. The insights showed that these changes could see more and more children and young people having their needs met without the need for an EHCP and having their needs met within a mainstream setting rather than a specialist placement. And as well as this, we have listened to parents, local authority colleagues and partners across education and health and social care, and we are considering carefully how to address and improve the experience of the EHCP process and reflecting on what practice could or should be done to make this much more consistent nationally. The Honourable Member for Chelmsford rightly referenced early intervention as a priority, and we absolutely agree. Children's earliest years make the biggest difference to their life chances, and we recognise the importance of high-quality early years education and care, and that it can lead to much better outcomes for all children. So having access to a formal childcare setting allows those needs to be identified at the earliest opportunity, and it means that appropriate support and intervention can be put in place so that children with special educational needs and disabilities can thrive. And it's also why we've introduced additional resources for early years educators to support children with SEND, a free online training module and SEND assessment guidance and resources. And we're reviewing the SEND funding arrangements to make sure that they are suitable for supporting children with SEND. And this week we published the updated operational guidance alongside detailed case studies of good local practice to provide more detail to support local authorities and promote greater consistency. And also in response to the Honourable Member for Chelmsford, who highlighted the broad specialist workforce that is needed across education, health and care. We know that far too many children have been waiting for speech and language therapy, so to support the demand, we're working in partnership with NHS England and funding the Early Language and Support for Every Child programme. It is trialling new and better ways to identify and support children with speech and language and communication needs, and it's being delivered through 9 regional Pathfinder partnerships at the moment through our SEND and AP Change programme. And we know that continuing to build that pipeline of language therapists and speech therapists is absolutely essential. So we've introduced a speech and language degree apprenticeship. It's now in its 3rd year of delivery, and it offers alternative pathways to the traditional route. And finally, whilst most education, health and care plans are concluded within a tribunal hearing, I have heard concerns from honourable members about the process. We want all children and young people with SEND or an AP to get the support they need when they need it, which is why we're strengthening the accountability in mainstream settings to make sure they're inclusive. It's why we're working with Ofsted and supporting the mainstream workforce to increase their expertise. It's why we'll also increase mainstream capacity by encouraging schools to set up their own SEN provision units, and why we're also supporting teachers with training so that every teacher is a special educational needs and disabilities teacher. Again, I say there are no quick fixes, but we are getting on with the job on multiple fronts. So I want to thank the Honourable Lady again for bringing this important matter forward and for all who have contributed to the debate today, reforming the system, supporting children and young people with special educational needs to achieve and thrive and regain the confidence and trust of families are goals that I know we all share. So my final word goes to all those working across education, health and care in the interests of our children and young people with special educational needs. Thank you for all you do, and I know that together we can deliver for our children and young people, including those with SEND.
Goldman to very briefly respond to this epic debate.
I thank you, Dr. Huck, and I'm not totally sure that I thanked you for your chairmanship earlier, so thank you very much. I'd like to thank all honourable members who have taken part in this really important debate and contributed such harrowing stories in some circumstances, but it's really, really important, and obviously I don't have time to go through them all. So what I'm going to say is this. This time last year was about almost exactly the time when I first heard about this subject, as in the terrible state that special educational needs was in, because a parent raised it with me and they told me what was going on. At that time, when I started digging into it, parents just did not feel heard. They felt that nobody was listening to them. So I would just like to say to any parents, anybody involved in education who has been battling this at the moment, I think you can see by what's happened here today that we are listening now, and we will keep holding the government's feet to the fire and making sure that they make progress, which I very much hope they will. And indeed, I have faith that they do indeed want to make progress. So thank you very much for being part of this. I hope we make progress very soon.
Thank you. The question is that this House has considered government support for education, health and care plans. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. I think the ayes have it. Order. Order.